Shalom and aloha. So I'm Alan Friedlander. I'm the director of the Fisheries Ecology Research Lab at the University of Hawaii, and also working on National Geographic Pristine Seas project. So I've taken the liberty here to go a little further afield and talk not just about coral reefs and coral reef fishes, but to talk about a global project that we've been working on for the last 5 years about looking at the last pristine places on Earth and trying to get conservation and protection for them. So I'll start off with about a 3.5 minute video and then go into a little bit more, not nearly as much data as Michelle's, so mainly just a lot of pretty pictures taking advantage of National Geographic. Okay, there we go.
The ocean covers over 70% of the Earth's surface. We live in a water world, yet we've explored only 5% of it. The ocean contains 99% of the living space on the planet. It's as vast as it is diverse. Full of secrets and wonder. To us, it often seems alien, like something from another planet. While much of the underwater world remains a mystery, we need it to survive. It's our greatest source of oxygen and a major source of protein for over 1 billion people. Yet we protect only 2% of it, whereas we protect 12% of the land. To most of us, on the surface, the ocean looks the same as it did hundreds of years ago. But the effects of fishing and development are reaching farther and deeper as our global population increases and new technologies are developed. And the ocean is getting warmer and more acidic because of excessive carbon pollution. Ocean life is suffering. Miraculously, some places remain untouched by human impacts. They are so remote that they've just managed to escape the reaches of our pollutants and fishing lines. They are the last pristine places left in the ocean. The goal of National Geographic's Pristine Seas is to help protect these last wild places, to inspire world leaders to secure these precious areas in large marine reserves by combining exploration, rigorous scientific research, and compelling films and media. In the past 5 years, in collaboration with key partners, we've worked with leaders of countries to create some of the largest marine reserves in the world. The ocean that needs protection. Pristine Seas continues working to inspire more governments to create new marine reserves. National Geographic's Pristine Seas will help countries to achieve the global commitment of 10% of the ocean protected by 2020. We will continue working with leaders from these areas and more to secure the last pristine seas. These remaining places are all that's left to understand what we have lost and what could be again in the future.
Okay, so sorry about the infomercial, but that's kind of the work we've been doing in the last few years. And the president of Gabon just made an announcement 2 weeks ago at the World Parks Congress that they were going to protect 20% of their exclusive economic zone in no-take. So that was a big announcement and a lot to do with the work that we did there 2 years ago. So up until recently, very little of the ocean has been protected. And you can see here the dots are very small, and in fact, most of them don't really represent fully no-take marine protected areas. So even though 2% is fully protected, we need to do much more. Some figures are in the neighborhood of 20 to 30% of full protection to have any type of conservation effects, and even more if we're looking for fisheries benefits. So what we did was we looked at the global influences on the marine environment to try to get a handle of where are the last pristine places left on Earth. You can look at the global map of fishing here and some obvious areas, the Gulf of Alaska, big upwelling areas off of Chile and Peru, Indian Ocean, obviously the entire North Sea and Mediterranean, and large swaths of Southeast Asia and along the Central Pacific where the major tuna fisheries in the world take place. So it's pretty extensive, the amount of fishing that's taking place globally. Likewise, when we just look at the sheer volume of shipping that's taking place, it's essentially everywhere, particularly if we focus just on the Northern Hemisphere. There's very few open spaces in there. We can obviously see that shipping, fishing, all these things have immense impacts at a global scale. Pollution sources, for the most part, are coastal in nature, much more so around North America and Europe and Southeast Asia, but most of the world, at least coastally where there are big urban centers, aren't really spared very much from the effects of coastal pollution, coastal development, shoreline armoring, and various forms of modifications to the habitat. So when you put all these things together, you can see a map of human impacts at a global scale, and it looks fairly grim. If you look at all of North America, all of Europe, much of Africa, primarily Southeast Asia, you can see it's all really red. So humans have an enormous impact on the ocean, especially in all the coastal zones. Some areas in the Central Pacific, areas in the Southern Ocean, areas in the Arctic have been spared the brunt of human activity up until recently. We also looked at sea ice because up until now, that's kind of been a deterrent to human exploration in both the Arctic and the Antarctic. We did a trip to the northern Arctic 2 summers ago, and shipping is starting to be very viable. Russia ships coal, minerals, other things to China now over the polar route about 4 or 5 months a year, and so that's going to become more common as time goes on. Also, along with that, oil and gas exploration is starting to happen in the Arctic as a result of warming and lack of ice. And in addition to that, fisheries are starting to be exploited up in the Arctic, which haven't taken place really up until this point. So when you combine areas that have been kind of prevented from human influences up until this point and all the influences that we see, we can develop a map of where we think some of the last pristine places are on Earth. And again, it's mainly the high Arctic, the Southern Ocean, various little isolated islands down here in the Southern Ocean, and a number of places in the Central Pacific. We've done 13 expeditions to date, and we've gotten to see some pretty amazing places. As far north as Franz Josef Land in the Russian Arctic, 82 degrees north. But the majority of our places that we've investigated have been primarily in the tropics, in coral reefs, and primarily in the Pacific region. The ones that are circled in green are areas that have gotten full protection now. Actually, President Obama just expanded the Northern Line Islands protected area now from 250,000 square kilometers to over 1 million square kilometers now, so that's substantial. All told, these areas account for 1.5 million square kilometers of areas under full protection, and many of the other areas, the President of Chile is probably going to announce Desventuradas Island next October at a global ocean summit that they're having. So the Pristine Seas project kind of works at it from 3 angles. We do rigorous scientific investigations, We try to do compelling media in the way of television shows and other sources of media. And then we work at it from the policy angle as far as working at the highest levels of government to try to influence decision makers for large-scale protection. Before, I want to diffuse this right now because people are going to say, well, what about all the places where people are and why is that? And that's a fight that a lot of people are fighting globally and fully recognize that. In Hawaii, where I'm based, we do a lot of community-based managed initiatives and work at very, very small scales. And this is not meant to replace that, or it's meant to complement that. So these should be the easiest areas in the ocean to protect, but we really need to protect them because of this. I think this is the fundamental problem, not only in marine conservation, but just in global conservation and our understanding of the natural environment is the shifting baseline, where each subsequent generation has lower and lower expectations of what they think that their natural environment is supposed to be. If you're born today and you're born in an ecosystem that looks like that, that's natural to you. Whereas we've come very, very far from what a natural system is like. We don't know where we are on the system, and therefore we can't gauge how our management actions are taking place. And so we really need these pristine areas over here as baselines to see how well we're doing as a society managing our resources. We may never get back to these places, and a lot, because where there's people, you can't really have pristine systems. It's incompatible. But we need to know where we are on this gradient, and that's where pristine places help out. Now I'll get back to coral reefs a little bit, since that was the point of the talk, right, Yanni? Okay. This is kind of a sequence of events of what happens as a system coral reef gets degraded over time. So you can see a pristine system here. This is Southern Line Islands, Caroline Atoll, dominated by large apex predators, very high coral cover, just abundant life. As you remove the large predators, which are the first things to go from the system, they're most susceptible to overfishing. You get mesoscale carnivores, and the system still functions pretty well. Once these predators are gone, you get release of the herbivorous fish, the lower order vertebrate feeders, typically more small-bodied fish. And the system's still kind of chugging along okay, but not completely. You still have a lot of herbivores keeping the reef in fairly good shape. Once those herbivores get removed by fishing, by other deleterious effects, that's when the wheels come off and the system crashes. You get algae overgrowing the reef. You get this scuzzy mess here. It's not very hospitable environment. Reductions in biodiversity, reductions in total standing stock of fishes and in biomass in general. And that's kind of the sequence that you see on a coral reef from fishing. Same thing happens with the corals themselves. You see these structurally complex, high diversity systems that harbor a huge amount of biodiversity in there. As time goes on and degradation takes place, the system becomes less diverse. It's less dominated by these structurally architectural species, such as corals. And then you get these scuzzy reefs dominated by macroalgae, which don't provide a lot of useful ecosystem services. And it's not just corals and algae. This is a study that we did in the Northern Line Islands. So this is Kingman Reef here, population 0. It's an atoll, relatively pristine, very high standing stock of fish. Chimaera Atoll, population of between 10 and 20 people, depending on how many researchers are there. Tabueran, Fanny Island, about 2,000 people. And then Kirimati, or Christmas Island, about 10,000 people, which doesn't seem like a huge amount. It's a fairly large atoll, but yet you still see a relatively pronounced impact of fishing on this. Coral cover goes down as you go from pristine to fishing. Likewise, turf and macroalgae replace the declines in coral. But also interesting things that you wouldn't expect, like bacteria and viruses, also increase substantially in both overall abundance and in diversity as you go from pristine to degraded ecosystems. Okay, so what do we do in these expeditions? We try to conduct rigorous scientific studies. In many of these places, people haven't really ever surveyed before. So we do quantitative surveys of fish, coral, algae, in this case endemic sea lions in Juan Fernandez Islands off of Chile. And we also do collections primarily for invertebrates that, since these places have never been surveyed before, we've working with colleagues from around the world, many new discoveries, many species still yet unclassified and undefined. Also use new technologies. We can only dive to 50 meters, more or less, with any effectiveness. So we've been using submersibles lately to get us down to depths of 500 to 1,000 meters. And this really opens up a whole new world, and we can look at the connectivity of the system. Likewise, the National Geographic Remote Imaging Lab has developed deep sea drop cameras. So these have been to the bottom of the Marianas Trench, so 10,000 meters. Can't go any deeper. They've been a very effective tools. We deploy them at seamounts, places in deep canyons, and they're amazing high definition cameras, and we can use them in a quantitative manner to get information not only on species presence, but on species abundance. These are false cat sharks, rarely seen before, depth of about 1,000 meters. So, probably some of the first images for some of these species, very reduced eye structure and really kind of interesting critters that don't often get seen or photographed. So, what defines a pristine place, or how do you know it? You kind of know it when you see it. You get in the water and you're not at the top of the food chain, dominated by large predators for the most part. And the system just seems in balance, and it's kind of hard to describe in some respects. It's a bit of a gestalt about what's pristine and what's not pristine, but everything seems to be in its place. Prey species aren't always out in the open, looking around as your typical coral reef, but they're cowering because they know they're going to be eaten. So it's a life on the edge kind of ecosystem. Likewise, in the far north, in Russian Arctic, places are dominated by high biomass, in this case walruses. So walruses are probably going to be the short-term benefactors of climate change. Reduction in sea ice is going to provide more haul-out facility or more haul-out areas for walruses. So in the short term, they may be one of the benefactors of climate change. This shows some data, finally. From some work that we've done and others have done around the world. Y-axis here is fish biomass in tons per hectare, and along the x-axis are various places that have been surveyed. The asterisks represent places that we've surveyed. Apex predators are basically the top predators in the ecosystem: sharks, jacks, large groupers. And you can see some of these places like the Coral Sea in New Caledonia, Cocos Islands off Costa Rica, Kingman Island, which I mentioned before, and some of these other areas. The biomass of apex predators is equal to or greater than what we see of the prey species. And that was kind of a revelation, that you can have almost as many, if not more, predators than you can have prey in a system. And it's still very controversial whether that's actually real or an artifact. But the point I want to make is, even though you see these small green bars towards the right there, and represent almost primarily prey species, those bars really represent about 99% of the coral reefs that you see around the world. These areas here that we've been able to survey are quite anomalous, and they really represent a small proportion of reefs worldwide. So, what else defines pristine places? Like I said, high architectural complexity that can harbor a lot of biomass. But it's not just coral reefs. In the far north Russian Arctic at 82 degrees north, where the water temperature is -2 degrees C, you still see this an amazing abundance of life. Every square centimeter is covered with something on that reef. So even in this harsh environment, life continues to thrive in places unaffected by people. Pristine seas are also resilient. You see this row of crown-of-thorns starfish there, and crown-of-thorns feed directly on corals, mainly these table corals here. So you can see them just mowing down the reef. In a non-pristine area, these reefs will get overgrown by macroalgae. In a pristine reef where there's a lot of herbivorous fish, they'll keep the macroalgae down and the reefs will recover. So this kind of disturbance events, hurricanes, bleaching events, other types of kind of variable or stochastic disturbances, pristine sites tend to rebound from better than non-pristine sites. Many of these pristine sites are in remote locations, so we have a high proportion of endemic species, as Michelle was talking about. So this is from Easter Island. This is Tipi Tipi Uri, which is an endemic butterfly fish from Easter Island. And although it's found nowhere else on Earth, it's one of the most common species that you see at Easter Island. This is in the close to the harbor. And so what you can see is when you find endemics in these remote places, they tend to proliferate and tend to be quite common. The rare species of Chimaera yet described to humans at this point from our deep sea drop cameras, and every time we go out and drop the camera out on a seamount or somewhere at depth, we're always finding new species. And so we've got a long list of species that need to be ID'd at this point. So what countries have pristine areas left? The US, Russia, UK, Canada, Australia, and the country of Kiribati. And you'll notice on that x-axis there that almost all the countries except for Kiribati are either developed or developing countries. Kiribati is the only one that's really an underdeveloped country. So a lot of these countries have the resources to take care of these places, yet they're not really doing a fantastic job of it. The U.S. has done a moderate job. Russia's done very poor. We're working very heavily with the Russian Geographic Society, the Russian National Parks to work on some of their Arctic locations. Things are very difficult now with Crimea and the ruble and everything else. But many of these countries really haven't stepped up to the plate as far as conservation goes. Rent from fishing. Most of these people are throwing away money subsidizing fisheries. Kiribati, again, undeveloped country, gets most of their GDP from fishing permits. But for the most part, a lot of countries are losing money by giving out fishing permits in these places. Cost of protection. For a global network of protected areas that would account for about 10% of the ocean, we're looking between 100 million and 1.4 billion. I think it's closer to the lower end of that now. Satellite technologies improving by the day. And this was just launched last week by Google and Oceana and a couple other organizations. And this is Global Fish Watch. And you can actually track every boat that's fishing in the world right now that has a vessel monitoring system. And we're also working with technologies with a couple companies where we can monitor boats that don't have vessel monitoring system. So for a place like Pitcairn, somewhere there that we've been working on with the UK government, for 750,000 square kilometers, that place can be monitored remotely at about $300,000 a year, which is totally doable. And then bilateral, multilateral agreements need to kick in for interdiction when boats come to shore, because people who are thinking about patrol boats going out and monitoring and enforcing fishing regulations are fighting the last war. It's impossible to do. So I think it's a very achievable goal. So just want to say, annual fisheries subsidies are about $25 billion a year when we think about subsidized fuel, subsidized boats, relief of tax burdens, all these other things. Just the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park Authority alone generates about $4 billion a year in revenue for Australia. So, the costs and the benefits associated with these protected areas greatly outweigh the fisheries benefits and the fisheries costs. So, pristine areas, dominated by large predators, healthy systems, they have unique biodiversity value. And they're the last remaining intact systems that we can use as real benchmarks about how ecosystems used to function in the past before people. And the economics are also there, despite what a lot of people would want you to believe. So, Toda.
Thanks, Alan. Any questions?
Hello. My question is, how did you define or quantify the gradient of human impact?
Yeah, that's a question we've been working on in the workshop all week. From the global perspective was just a combination of the global footprint of fishing, coastal development, a lot of the other. There's been a number of large meta-analyses that have been done to kind of define the human footprint in places. For the first set of pristine sites that we looked at, it was kind of just guesswork. We tried to go to some of the most remote places that took days to get to by sea, and just assuming that there weren't people. And in some places that was true. We just came from the most southern island in French Polynesia called Rapa-Iti. And even though it's 3 days sail from Tahiti, French Polynesia, we still saw a number of sharks with fish hooks in their mouth. So the global influence of large industrial fleets is almost pervasive everywhere. It's not an easy one to answer. A lot of it's guesswork. If you look at the FAO global data for fisheries, it's a little better than a guess for the most part. And so we do what we can. Don't have a great answer for that one.
More questions? Lee?
You said that, to get this right, that the UK is the country with the third amount of
Pristine areas.
species.
Hmm.
Well, I'm just out of curiosity, other than the Isles of Scilly, which other ones are there?
It's the Pitcairn Group, the Chagos Archipelago,
Okay.
Tristan de, whatever, in the south, some of the islands in the South Atlantic, South Sandwich Islands.
Okay.
Last question for now, for the break.
You were saying pristine, and I don't really understand your, what is pristine exactly? Because even about 100 years ago, there was one of the professors that investigated and he was describing different pristine than what we see as pristine today. So what is pristine? How do you say?
There is no good definition, and a lot of people argue there are no pristine places left in the ocean because every place has been impacted to some degree or another. Even some of the remote places in the southern Line Islands that don't have people. People were there in the mid-1800s harvesting bird guano and had an impact, and foreign fishing fleets have an impact. So there is no pristine. It's a gradient, and there are places that are relatively pristine. So the Galapagos, I would definitely not consider pristine. Some of my students are doing some work there right now, and even though there's a series of marine protected areas, half of them the fishermen don't know about, and the other half they don't pay any attention to. But we are doing an expedition there next year to highlight the northern islands of Darwin and Wolf, because on the scale of the Galapagos, that's an amazing place. There's whale sharks and manta rays, and that's where the hammerheads aggregate. And so it's more about using it as a tool to help inspire people to care about places than an actual precise definition.
Great, thank you, Alan. Let's take half an hour.